Welcome to the Narrate podcast, where we aim to tell God's story with our lives. We'll be continuing to post the Sunday message each week, but we want to dive a little deeper and offer some content to supplement your life with God, and that's where our Beyond Sunday series comes in. Join Adam and Narrate staff as they provide thoughtful discussions, ideas, and interviews that go beyond the message you'll hear on Sunday. Hi, Narrate. In this episode, Adam sits down with Chris and Amy Watson, who are owners at Narrate. Chris and Amy had all 4 of their kids baptized this year at our Duncan Dine event, and they agreed to sit down and talk about some of their faith journey and their process leading up to those baptisms. So here's the conversation between Adam, Chris, and Amy Watson.
The part that stands out to me about you guys, and I might have this wrong, is I have you in my head before COVID, as you were like there periodically, and then after COVID you were like there every week. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was there a why? Was that intentional on your part, or what changed there?
No, I think, when we moved here, we were trying to find a place, a church, home. And we bounced around, but we were not diligent about, going to a different place every Sunday. So we try something, and then a couple weeks later try something else, and we kind of always gravitated back to Narrate, it seemed like, but we never for whatever reason, we didn't have kids, so I suppose we were maybe doing more things on the weekends, or just had been out of the going to church every day rhythm since college and grad school, and we never did anything in Bozeman, really. I mean, journey a few times, but...
Because you both did grad school in Bozeman together. Were you married when you did grad school?
No.
No, okay.
I don't think our professors would have allowed that.
Why do you say that?
Oh, just focus on your thesis, nothing else.
You don't need to plan a wedding.
Because you're both economists.
Yep.
Wow. But so you met in grad school. You weren't married in grad school. You moved here. So when COVID hit, how many kids did you have?
1. I was pregnant. Emery was born April of 2020.
Okay. Wow.
So she was born right when all the chaos ensued. It was different in the hospital and stuff. They couldn't. Luckily, Chris could be there for her birth. I was nervous that she wouldn't be able to, but we couldn't have any visitors. Even when Wesley was born 2 years later, we still couldn't have any visitors. It wasn't until Reese was born that any of the kids were able to meet one of their newest sibling in the hospital. Up until that point, they had all just met them at home once we got back. But It is wild.
Yeah, there's also a theme there of births. So you've given birth to how many children in how many years?
4 kids in 6 years. Wow. Yeah.
And their ages now are
6, 4, 2, and our oldest is Harper. Yep, she was born in 2018. And so that makes her 6 now. 6.5, she'll tell you. And Emery was born in April of 2020, and she's 4 now. And then Wesley was born in May of 2022, so he's 2. And then Reese is our youngest, and she was just born this last March.
And number 5 is due when?
Not unless the Lord wills it. Yeah.
Yeah. So for you guys, the pre-post COVID, that was just kind of the natural progression of finding a church and getting into rhythm. And
yeah, I mean, I started, I think, helping with teardown prior to COVID.
Yeah,
that's what just kind of had a sense to just get the foot in some way to start building community more than just being anonymous in the crowd. But that kind of coincided with Harper's birth, and still made it hard to. We didn't put as much effort into. We let the busyness of having our first child kind of get in the way of consistently going on Sunday mornings, and then.
I think for me too, I was still kind of committed to or hoping that I could kind of return to my pre-kid routines. For example, we both were fairly heavily involved in CrossFit before we had Harper, and that took up 2 hours at least per day for a while. Not every single day, but after work, that's where you went, and that's what you did, and that's where our community kind of was more so than a fitness. We didn't have we weren't competing or like doing anything
Right.
that way, but that's where all of our friends were. And so that's kind of what our community was. And I think at least after Harper was born, I felt like, oh, eventually I'm going to get back to that community, and realizing that it wasn't going to, that it just wasn't realistic, was kind of something that and just to build deeper community, more meaningful community, and being able to raise our kids in the church was something that we really wanted to do. And we both grew up in the church, so, broadly, just the church. So we wanted to be able to do that. And I think the more I realized that we needed that community, the more I attended church, the more I realized I didn't know. And I felt very unable to answer our oldest questions. And I think that was a big part of it for me, is I need to make sure if this is something that I'm going to pass down to my kids, I need to make sure that I do my due diligence and don't just follow in the footsteps that I was raised in, that this is a very intentional for me. This is a decision that we as a family are making for our kids, and not just because this is the way we were raised, you know.
Wow.
So that's kind of how I would frame it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to tell this story, you don't have to, but I have this memory of there was one Sunday where you were pregnant and life was chaotic and you were super emotional but felt affirmed, God wanted me here today.
Yeah, and I remember that day. I was pregnant with Wesley. It was early on, and I always am super, super tired. And this was in the first part of my pregnancy, and this was the period of time when we first started coming to Narrate consistently. Chris and I had to switch off services, so we didn't bring and we can. I'm happy to talk about this too, but it's kind of a side conversation. In my growing up, I had some hesitancy in going to my own kid service, when I was a kid, and Harper was having some of those same struggles I was noticing, and it was triggering a lot in me, so I just didn't want to deal with it, to be honest, and so the way that we did it is we just switched off, so someone was always home with the kids.
So when they stayed home, you guys took turns going to church?
Yeah, we just took turns just going to the different services. And so
Which
I think
you at the early one, because
you had tear down, so I had to go to the 9. And
that's right.
And
I see what you did there. I'm seeing
yeah. And I remember waking up and it was 8:45, and I was I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I'm in bed. This is, even if I would have to not, have my coffee in the morning, which, I always feel like I need, and just kind of rush out the door. And so I laid there for another probably 5 minutes, essentially bargaining with God. It was I don't need this. It's okay. I'll go next week, all the things that we do. And God was just get up. I'm telling you to get up. Get up and go. And that's it. I couldn't. And I was annoyed. If you told Chris, I was mad. It's I'm going to church. I can't get this, God won't be quiet this morning. He's not letting me win. So I'm going to get up and go to church. And I told myself, I'll just stop at Starbucks on the way home, because we run by the one that's, I don't know street names, but there's a Starbucks that we normally go by. And then on the way driving in, I was well, if there's any more than one car, I won't stop, because that's going to take too much time. And as I drove by, there was 2 cars, and I was oh, I already had bargained with myself. So and in that moment, God's you don't need coffee. You just need to get to church. You just need to be in community. So I got there, and then, sat and was still okay. I don't even remember if I got the coffee that you guys provided. I think I was late enough that I just was I just need to get in and sit down. And I remember your question was, something about in what ways has God called you to obedience? And I laughed, because I was
That's right.
Yeah.
Context.
It was about obedience.
Huh.
And just doing what God calls you to do, even when you don't feel like it. And then I just was okay, I see why you needed me here. It was immediately apparent that I just needed to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that interaction with you, and you were obviously, that was a powerful,
yeah.
That's going to be one of those moments that you don't soon forget.
No, certainly. And I think one thing I've thought that I kind of, in reflecting on that moment too, was I think, the devil or, the negative powers in the world, like what he'll try to convince you is that it's not that big of a deal. Like those little things, those little promptings, those little voices that you hear throughout the day is like, that thought wasn't mine. I wouldn't have thought that thought. Like that thought came from the Holy Spirit. And immediately, Satan will tell you it doesn't matter. Like it's not that big of a deal. What's it to you if you go have that conversation with someone that you don't want to? Or, have those people over. Like, it's not that big of a deal if you have those friends over for dinner tonight or not, even though you're really tired. Like, you could just reschedule. It's fine.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think, not to say that there's not circumstances where that is appropriate, but just not allow, don't allow those moments to don't undervalue those moments or let those voices in your head telling you that what you say, what you do doesn't have an impact, because it can really. And I think that's that. And it's hard to say yes in those situations, because those circumstances are so small and yet they're so frequent, especially the more you acknowledge them and the more you lean into it, the more God's going to speak to you and use you, and you're going to have to continually be confronted with. For me, like after the service, I was pretty emotional just from, the message, and then afterwards, the song was Holy Spirit, Come. And so it was a calling the Holy Spirit to come and be alive in your life. And at least that morning I had said, please go away. Like, I don't really want to listen. So it was me, apologizing and saying, I'm sorry. Like, yes, you can come even when it's hard, come. And, I felt like God was telling me to come talk to you. And I don't like to talk to people, particularly when I'm in an emotional state. Kind of that like fly on the wall. I would like to rather just exit stage left and go have my moment by myself. But God just said, I didn't just do that for you. I didn't just bring this for you. It's not just your moment. So go and share it. And so then I was able to do that. And so I definitely look back on that moment as something that reminds me of the importance of kind of saying yes when you really don't want to.
It's a great point, because I know for me, it's easy to think about like the spiritual giants. It was these massive decisions that it seems like you're drawing attention to, like the little tiny incremental things that we take for granted. That's what constitutes the lives of the saints, and like doing important stuff and building a life. So you mentioned community. So a few years later, how would you assess that? Like, to what extent are you where you would like to be? Are you on that road? Like, how is community going for you guys?
I'd say really well.
That's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've been able to be involved to the extent where we're like, we're meeting more people. We are knowing names. Like, we have people we can call friends, and not just acquaintances or people you see for 10 minutes every week on a Sunday. And part of that's just being so thankful for you and the staff and all the opportunities you create for people to meet beyond Sunday mornings, and just your welcoming to your home and things like that. And I'm super happy with where we're at community wise, and want to continue growing in that for sure, and meeting people with in the same phase of life as us with little kids. It's been so just to kind of go through that together and share stories and realize that your kids aren't the only ones that struggle with this and that, and we're not the only parents that struggle with feeling
Patience.
like we're inadequate every hour of every day sometimes. But
I appreciate that, because it just seems like in a world where most people find their community in work and stuff, it seems like you guys have given a lot of energy to that, so good on you for doing that. Which kind of segues into the baptism conversation. Like, and I wasn't sure how to start this, because on the one hand there's like, why did you do this? But there's also this question of why not do this? Yes, because you guys. So Chris, you were baptized as an infant?
Yep. I want to say I was 6 months or so,
Okay.
but I'm not 100% certain. But certainly, yes. A baby.
Yeah, and Amy, you were not.
No, I wasn't. Yeah.
So how did that conversation start for you? Because Harper was almost was kind of her own decision, but for sure, at least 3 of your kids, it was an infant baptism, and I don't know, maybe it's 4. I don't know how you guys are counting her in that, but yeah, what led us into the background of what caused you to begin to have this conversation of we think we want to do the infant baptism route rather than the dedication route, which also would have been fine. But just curious what led you guys down that road.
Honestly, I'm not exactly sure how, what the impetus for the initial conversation was. We didn't really talk about it. I feel like we weren't really considering it until Amy was pregnant with Reese, and then I don't know if we just had this sense that your family's complete now. This child was kind of, you were waiting on her even though you didn't know that you were. And then just kind of, I think thinking about it more is going to the Dunkin' Dine events and for a few years prior, and just kind of realizing, okay, yeah, maybe our friends were getting their kids baptized, and and then we just started kind of I don't know if you have an idea of when.
Well, I
first came
remember
about.
Certainly at Dunkin' Dines watching other people who I respected and was in community with baptize their children, because I had this kind of idea of what infant baptism was that I didn't really subscribe to, and that just comes from my kind of family of origin and their connection with the Catholic Church, and the way that it was presented to me about infant baptism had a lot to do with original sin, and it was very fear motivated. At least the way that it was described to me was if you don't have your child baptized and then they die, they're not going to go to heaven. So you need to get them baptized out of the womb, just in case some lightning strikes and your kid dies. And I was well, I knew, that didn't resonate with me. So that wasn't ever, I didn't really think about it until I started to see people that I loved and respected baptizing their children, and it made me kind of be okay, I at least need to know why they're doing it and what motivation they have for it, because I trust and respect that they have a reason. And so then just that kind of opened up that conversation of why you might baptize infants, and they're being outside of just what I understood it to be.
I think for me too is I was always kind of thinking that I needed to, I knew I was baptized as an infant, but I always thought I didn't understand it well enough, and I thought I needed, at some point, should probably do it again, make that decision for myself, and then doing some research and listening to and reading various things to come to understand that kind of the once baptized, always baptized kind of thing was, I think, a bit of a revelation for me. And then looking back and reflecting on just how seasons of my life have gone, where I could certainly see where I could have gone down a crooked and dark path very easily, but for some reason, the people that I always ended up being friends with, whether it was high school and college and after, were always in some way connected to a youth group or a church of some sort, and always had faith. And thinking about that, maybe that's obviously that was God, providence, but also maybe that's also a result of what my parents did for me, that there's this grace that's kind of been following me, and
wow.
And so that was, I think, pretty powerful for me. And then thinking, well, that makes sense, and if that's the case, and we do this for our children, and it helps them find straight paths where they otherwise wouldn't in their life, then I think that's an incredible gift that we'd give them through our faith and care for them.
Yeah, so at the risk of putting words in your mouth, if I hear you and nuance this, but I mean, I think it was Father David, who's an Eastern Orthodox priest. He's the one that when I asked him, like, why do you guys don't even believe in original sin in that sense of the Roman Catholic idea that you've talked about, Amy? So why do you baptize infants? And his response was, because we believe that we need all the grace we can get. Sounds like for you, you almost like see evidence of that in your life. Yeah,
absolutely. And that I think I remember hearing you quote that multiple times from stage, and it's like, that's a great way to put it. And it's certainly something that resonated with me. I mean, like Amy, I didn't really share the kind of Roman Catholic view, but I also, the argument that you're, by doing this for them when they're children, you take something away from them when they, maybe are adults. But I think they still have that moment that they get to profess full faith and discipleship to Jesus. And that's, I don't remember my baptism, I guess, because I was a baby, but I certainly remember that moment. And, Amy probably remembers that. And maybe they were linked for her because she did the, credo baptism. But
so you have this clear point where you're like, I still know when I chose to follow Jesus, when I chose to own my own faith.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm pretty sure. Right? It was, I think, at some church camp, up in the mountains of central Idaho, sometime in late middle school, early high school, maybe. And then it's not like my life suddenly changed and my behavior changed right after that. I was still a
long road.
Troublemaker, and certainly had things and ways to grow, and still am, obviously. But so I think just hoping that this choice of baptism for our kids maybe helps them get to that moment. I don't know exactly how, but there's a mystery there that I kind of like as well. Surrendering to kind of the grace and power that comes from that sacrament.
Yeah, I think understanding the sacrament piece is why we chose to baptize over dedicate.
Say more about that.
Yeah, so I think there's just a lot of mystery in it that we don't understand, so I'll just preface with that. But also that God has sort of ordained this particular ceremony as a means to communicate with the world that you are one of his children. And in your doing this particular baptism, God recognizes that and sees that and gives grace to you because of your obedience to him, and that's something that he specifically ordained as the way to communicate with him of this particular. I think it's just it's almost like a more effective way to communicate with God. I feel like not that God needs, he understands our every thought and everything like that, but it's just like saying, hey, I understand that you have laid out this path for, birth into my family. And that's what I want to do. And so this is the way, and I want my children to inherit that. And so I think understanding the power of a sacrament, and then also for me, it was a little bit about connecting with generations past and like historical Israel, and that lineage that I wanted to pass down to our children. So I think just from my story, my dad in particular was raised Roman Catholic. And both of my parents were evangelical, or are currently today. I guess I don't know if they would necessarily claim that title, but that's what we were raised in, an evangelical church. And I think the dichotomy of those two worship styles is really apparent, where you have the more liturgical and sacramental practices of the Roman Catholic Church paired with the more paired against the really sort of vibrant, more emotional, and certainly more individualized. At least that was my experience of the evangelical church. And that this is baptism is an outward sign of an inward commitment that you've already made. You know, that's the way that the order of operations I learned was you come to commit your life to Christ, and then you are baptized.
Yeah.
And so flipping those things was really hard for me to wrap my brain around.
Yeah, you worked hard at it.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think something that I liked that you said a while ago about Trish Harrison Warren, was that I think she was talking about women, whether or not they can pastor. She's like, this is one of those things where I'm like, I think I'm 80% sure.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, honestly, I had to be okay with not being 100% sure that we were necessarily doing the right thing, but we were being prompted and led by the Holy Spirit. And at some point, you just have to do something.
Sure.
And so you have to make a decision, put it to bed, and do it. And so this is what we felt like was the right decision for our family. Certainly, we don't feel like it's the right decision necessarily for every child or family. But this is where the Holy Spirit was leading us. And I think that idea of, our kids inherit a lot of things from us, some intentionally and some not intentionally. And this, the church body and the church community is something I wanted them to intentionally inherit from us. And then down the road, they can decide whether that's something they want to take on as their own identity or not. But from the onset, before they do anything, I want them to know that they are a child of God and that they are a part of this community. And that is what God has called them to. Regardless of whatever happens in their life, I know that to be true for their whole life, is that God wants them in their life, or God wants him in their life, and he wants to have a relationship with them. And I wanted their baptism to be this like kind of pillar in their mind of God calling them to something. And they can at any point during their life accept or reject that and come back to that. And I think that's what I struggled with too, because I was baptized, I think I was 15 or 16 in high school. And I don't have, it wasn't, when I think of my moment where I made the decision to follow Christ, it was in college after that. Okay. And so I grew up in the church and I was baptized, and I'm sure, they had an altar call at the end of all of our services.
Okay.
And so it'd be like, okay, yes, well, first of all, I'm an introvert, so that scared the crap out of me. As a child in an adult service, I was never going to go up to the altar. But I would pray that prayer every time they prayed it, like just to make sure I was in. Like I probably prayed that prayer 24 times at least. And I just needed to make sure I was in, make sure I was in. And then I was baptized probably under that same kind of guise. And then in college later, I realized just through I took a class on C.S. Lewis. It was great. Loved it. And kind of through that process was like, God's gonna exist whether I acknowledge him or not.
Wow.
And so I probably should just acknowledge him and kind of go from here. So that's what, and so I guess then going back to the decision to baptize our children, if I was waiting for this moment of like, hey, they're going to make this choice to follow God, then get baptized, and then it's a straight path from there. Like I just know that's not necessarily the case.
Oh,
things can go up and down and all sideways. So just because someone's baptized doesn't mean that they're saved. At least that's not our particular belief.
Right.
We don't believe our this baptism saved our children necessarily. Their faith will save them. But I do believe that God acknowledges that as a sacrament and poses his grace upon them in that moment, and will help them straighten their path in the future.
Which is kind of what Chris experienced.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and again, this may be one of those, like, you don't want to get into this, but knowing that your dad made this cautious choice to move away from that and you moved back towards it. How have you honored him? Like, what has that conversation been like? Does he feel betrayed? What is that like?
No, I think I know he respects our decision, and he respects us, and that we're seeking the Lord and doing what we feel like is best. I think it probably did challenge him in his understanding of what infant baptism was. although I haven't had super lengthy discussions with him about that. But I do know, and my mom too, they made that decision together intentionally not to baptize me as an infant because they wanted that to be something that I decided for myself in later on in my life.
Yeah.
And I respect that, and I think that I don't wish that they necessarily baptized me as an infant. I don't harbor any hard feelings because they didn't.
Yeah.
But I do
like,
think that is a choice that you can make to baptize infants, and it's not necessarily unbiblical to kind of couch that in a big.
But they're not feeling dishonored either.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
They came, so.
Yeah, they came.
They did,
yeah, both my parents and his parents were there, and
Wow.
I think they acknowledged, our commitment and respected our decision, and are just happy that our kids are growing up. Then we'll know God. So, yeah.
When you're old like me, I'm guessing they're like that of like, you just take your wins where you can get them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge.
It's not a first tier issue, so to speak, for for them. It doesn't seem, and it's like they're willing to they trust our faith and Christ and the cross and all that, and if you guys want to do this, then
that's awesome. And
I think just assuring my dad that I wasn't doing it out of fear, like fear of damnation of my children if they died, I think helped him a little bit. Whether or not he buys into the same theological premise that we do, I don't know, but at least I could assure him that we're kind of coming at it from a different angle than he was baptized, because he was baptized as an infant.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't expect that you've listened to it yet, but that Dallas Willard that I sent you yesterday,
I haven't.
There's this line in there where he's talking about the cross, and he said, it's something, I need to go back and I want to just type this down in my notes, because he says something like, we do well to not think too much about the specifics of what happened at the cross, because if we do, we'll arrive at this place where and he says something like that it's not so much that God forgave us as that the debt was paid. And he just was like, that's really important that we understand that this God wants to forgive us. It's not just that his hand was forced because of accounting. And then he goes on to say, I just don't think when I get to the pearly gates anybody's going to open up a computer and see. He says, I think I'm just going to be greeted with, you've been forgiven.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, that it comes to mind for me there, just as you're talking about your kids and the mystery of it all, and just embracing the grace of God in it.
Yeah, and I think I'm a researcher by training, so it's really hard for me to give up things. But the more you
what do you mean by give up things? Like
just
certainty?
Yes, absolutely. I think when we first started coming to Narrate, I would sit and listen to you speak, and the questions that you would ask sometimes you didn't immediately then answer them, and my brain would stall out, be like, I couldn't, wait a second, where is it? I can't, I can't move on. And that was, years and years ago now, and I don't notice it anymore. That's not something that but it certainly at first I was like, wait a second, I don't, I need to come back and go look at whatever, verse, which is, I think the intention is you need to do more research because there isn't one specific answer.
How do you honor then that desire for certainty? Because that's also got to be God-given. I mean, that's part of your strength as a person. How do you honor that in yourself?
That's a good question. I think, like I said, I'm a researcher, so I do a lot of research professionally, and that certainly...
You wouldn't make a decision without due diligence, or at least an effort to understand, and then you're a little I'm not as much like that. Sometimes I feel like I can put maybe too much faith and trust into what I read or hear or something without I'm thinking about it as much as perhaps I should, and certainly not as much as she would.
You'll send me podcasts.
So sometimes that serves me well, and sometimes it doesn't.
Sure.
I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be skeptical, but X, Y, Z. So we're a good balance of
There's certain things I don't send her because I know that she will look at the title and be like, no, that's fake.
Yeah. That's fair. Well, which probably comes back to that 80% thing of like, that's, I think for someone with your personality, that's got to be huge to be able to acknowledge, like, I can get to 80, but I'm not going to get to 100, which just seems like the kingdom would be better if we had more of that.
Then what's faith if you're at 100%? So God calls us to have faith and trust, and we made a decision as a family, and so that's what you and I decided together, that we would baptize. It wasn't just me or just you. And
just the mystery is I don't know, I just love that. Like Paul always kind of talks about the mystery of Christ, and I was reading first chapter of 1 Corinthians, and he's talking about how the Jews want signs and the Gentiles want certainty, wisdom, kind of to prove this, and he's like, neither of those you're going to get. There's just a mystery here that you have to, the faith you have to give, and it's pretty powerful.
And yet you're saying that as yourself a scientist, like you're not someone who just runs to the gray, like you don't get to.
Yeah, so I'm a revenue forecaster though, so there's an error built into anything that I do. So I know that. For certain, I know that I'm not going to be absolutely right.
Wow.
But being right enough is what you aim for.
And could you do his job then, or would that drive you crazy? Because he's in forecasting.
Yeah,
she deals in this, dabbles in the same sort of realm. But.
Well, there's never a. So, the joke with an economist joke, if your podcast really wants one.
Sure. Yeah.
is give me an answer, ask me a question, and the answer is always, it depends. So that's, if you don't know, if you want to know what an economist is going to say, it's probably, it depends. And it depends on your assumptions. So there's never like black and white. It's not, I'm never dealing in black and white.
It's one hand in the other.
Yeah. It's just, the most likely to be right is the decision that you make. Yeah.
How did you, there's obviously, because my motive for this is not like to prove infant baptism, because I try to say that often, like this isn't about that. I think I can, like you've said, I respect both. I think I'm more and more intrigued at people like you, because I put myself in that category, who long ago rejected infant baptism and then have come back to respect it more than I understand it. And yet I also respect that there's a lot of people in my life who I do respect that still don't respect it, and that's okay. But I'm curious, because Harper's 6, and again, hers was kind of a gray area, but then Emery's 4, and is that right? Is she 4? So how did you, Emery and Wesley in particular, like Reese, there's not a conversation like, here's what's going to happen to you, like she's a newborn, but how did you talk with Wesley and Emery in particular about that? Or did you?
Well, I think we had the advantage of doing them all together, so there's a bit of a group effect there, so they were happy and content to go and not be alone in it. That's true. At least that's the way that. And Harper has 100,000 questions, so we had her go through Lexi's class with the other kids for a number of reasons, none of which unless she really said, I do not want to do this, we were going to get her baptized.
But she said at some point, I don't want to. And then at some point, she said, I do want to. So, that kind of signaled to us, it's like, you kind of understand, but you really don't fully grasp what's happening. And so I think we can still, another year or two, you certainly would, I think, have the agency to.
So in your hearts, hers was still more an infant baptism than not.
Yeah. But I knew she'd have a ton of questions, so I wanted her to have Lexi as a resource. And I wanted her to know that other kids that were going to be baptized as well, and hear their stories, and maybe let that kind of resonate with her as well. And I think she's a little bit like me in that she doesn't like the attention. So she, I think, also liked doing them all together, and that mom and dad would be in the water and we would all kind of have it together. It made it a little bit more chaotic in that way, but what in our life isn't. So It's fine.
You guys take the chaos so well. Like, I just genuinely so respect that about you guys. And it's not just because I'm on the receiving end of the benefit of that, but like the consistency with which you're in community. And I mean, from where I sit, that's where I was curious if you're actually getting the advantage, because it sure feels like it from where I sit. And this is the conversation I have with people all the time is like, well, what you've got people who are after community is there's this conversation of like, if person A looks left and they see someone that is there once a week, and they look right and they see that someone that's there every week, like you can't blame them for, that's not called clickiness, that's just called pragmatic if they gravitate to that person on the right. And
yeah, you look forward to seeing that person every week and kind of,
yeah,
you know, checking in for 2 minutes as you pass each other, picking up kids, or you know, standing in the lobby after the service. And it's just nice that you then know them a little bit, so you have, you know, questions that you can ask them to check in, and they can do vice versa. And yeah, it's great.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Thank you guys. You make us better. It's really fun to be in community with you, and also to be able to hear your story. And thanks.
Yeah, it's always I think a little bit surprising to both of us when we're asked to, you know, speak in any capacity, whether it's like on the stage or in here, because we, like, I think just, I grew up in the mega church thing, so you kind of could fly under the radar.
Sure.
And so I just thank you for the opportunity to do that, and hopefully it's enriches, you know, the church. And I think that's kind of what it came down to. And when we think back towards COVID and before and after and the impact, it was like, you know, at some point there's no perfect church, but God calls you to be a part of it and make it better. So it's not just, you know, I think you said once with like, maybe it was the online, the live stream, and somebody was talking to you about how much they appreciated that, and that they could still go do whatever they wanted on Sunday or whatever. And it was like, yeah, well, you know, maybe the church is missing out on you. Yeah. And that's something I think we just, both of us, to have a tendency to devalue our own contributions and undervalue the work that God can do in us, I guess, in that sense. Because it's not like, you know, for me coming here, it was like, okay, it's not that I necessarily am great, but if there's anything good in me, it's because God put it there. And so it's our opportunity to show that. Yeah.
Yeah. The stories are so valuable. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you'd like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us online at narratechurch.org.
You can also look us up on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks for listening.